Hello, hey, and welcome to my tent, a place to hear life experiences, different opinions, a range of journeys, and a viewpoint different than our own. A place to challenge our own thoughts, a space to learn a little bit, and I promise some fun along the way. I believe we're better when we let a range of people into our tents, so welcome to mine. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Welcome to My Tent podcast. I'm very excited to be back with a solo episode today. I feel like I have not recorded a solo in a minute, but we're back. And as you can maybe see by the launching of this episode, that it is now airing on Fridays. So we're moving from airing episodes on Wednesdays to Fridays with some business stuff going on and schedule type things, as well as availability of guests and etc. We're going to change the date. So now new episodes will be airing on Fridays. So here we are on a Friday. Happy Friday if this is when you are listening to this episode. We're going to chat today about something that I've spoken about, sort of, not in much depth, but we're going to go really into it today because it's a question that I get kind of frequently. And then I don't know if I would call it criticism, but I would call it some questioning over this decision. So we're going to talk about being one and done in terms of having children. So before I go into this, I also want to make it abundantly clear that, one, we have the right to change our minds. And two, I'm very well aware that things happen, right? And should that happen, we would be filled with joy. I am sure. With the fact that we are pretty confidently one and done, I'm sure we'd have some feelings, but it's not to say that if the universe put that in our path, we would not accept it. So I just kind of want to get that out of the way because that's some of the questioning that comes up is like, you're aware that things happen, right? Yes. And should that be the case for us, we would take that as the sign and it would all be well and good. But for the time being, we are actively preventing that from happening. And we are fairly confident with our decision to only have one child. I think we need to walk this back just a bit because people are often curious about how we arrived at this decision. And I will say it's a combination of things that we have always felt, or I have always felt, and what ended up happening in the path to getting one living child earthside. And I think those two things in tandem have really solidified our thoughts behind this. And I say ours because it is a mutual decision that I and my husband, we had to make together. While he is acutely aware that my physical body is the one that goes through the pregnancy and birthing a child, as well as, what's the word I'm looking for? Having a real live brain lapse. Primary parent, that's it. Typically falls on me. He also does get to have some say in the decision. He is the father. He is my husband. This is his family as well. So I think it's very valuable to get his input. And he also ultimately knows that I have more involvement in a lot of ways in both carrying, birthing, and then where things just fall that make sense with our family. So I also want to make that known where it's a conversation, but those things do need to be taken into account also, in my opinion. So we'll also start there. But growing up, I think people that I've spoken to I think and you know if you do or do not want children typically. I know that there's some people that may be on the fence. It's kind of a up in the air type thing of I could or I couldn't. And if you are one of those people, I'd actually love to talk to you because that's a point of view I would find very fascinating. But at least for me and for my husband, we saw children in our future. And that was a conversation that we did have when we were dating before we got engaged, which I think is an important conversation to have if you're considering spending your life with someone, is that you're on the same page about that. Because I assume it would be difficult if one person really wanted children and one person was adamantly against it. That might be something to navigate that would be challenging. But we were both on the same page that we knew we wanted kids. And what surprises people sometimes is I was always kind of okay with the thought of only one. It surprises people because I come from a very big family. Granted, it is very blended, but I have 5 siblings. And often people hear, wait, you only want one, but you have so many siblings. And I do. And I love them all very deeply. And the sets of siblings are all from a variety of marriages and partnerings. But I grew up with 5 siblings, and that to me was just normal. And on the other hand, my husband also has 2 siblings and a lot of extended family and cousins. And we always grew up in large family dynamics. So this confuses people where they are a little bit baffled that we are okay with having a single child. But in my heart, I always kind of knew I wanted them and knew I wanted to be a mother. But I also felt this sense of peace that if that was just one, I'd be okay with that. And I let myself stay open to that, especially as I got older and marriage and starting families became much more of a reality and a conversation. I really always in my mind knew that if just one was it, just one was it. And that's where it all started. I never really saw myself envisioning this future with a set number of kids that I needed to have to feel complete. I do strongly believe that some people know from a very early age that they do have visions and hopes and dreams of having a large family. And if that blows your hair back, go for it. This is where I'm also saying I think people also know if they do or do not want children. I have met people, I know people who are child-free and they feel very passionately about that. And I respect that. And if you want to be child-free, that's incredible. If that is what your, goals and dreams and all of that is if that's child-free, by all means. But I do also know some people who have said to me, I always knew I wanted 3. When I closed my eyes and dreamed about what my family would be, it was 3. And to me, I just never felt that. I just never had that. I just knew at least the one. And I was confident and felt very secure about that. Now, let's talk about what also has solidified this decision. I have plenty of episodes on the challenges we experienced attempting to even just get the one child. Here, I have whole episodes on our infertility journey, IVF journey, all of that, if you want to go back and take a listen. It was much more challenging than anticipated to have a baby, to just get the one. I never thought I would have problems. I was 30 when we started trying. It wasn't necessarily too long after we had gotten married. And I had always had predictable cycles. I was in good health, and it just wasn't happening for us. And I don't think that this is talked about enough. I think more people are starting to open the conversation around what it feels like to try to conceive. And I don't know, Dad, I'm sorry if you're listening to this, but in that, we tried for 14 months naturally, just the two of us, the good old fashioned way. And it became a very stressful situation because it becomes very unfun, where you're peeing on all these sticks and you're trying not to piss on your hands and looking at the ovulation strips. And then you get in this point where you're like, I really don't want to do this right now, but we have to. It becomes very unromantic sometimes. And it becomes very stressful, especially as you're entering month after month of not finding success. So we came up across these crossroads where everything that we're taught basically in school and sex education, I feel like is just so lacking, is that you basically have sex once and you get pregnant. And then when you go to try to get pregnant, it's a lot of people don't understand their bodies. I didn't. And then B, it's actually not as simple sometimes as that seems. So we had this journey of attempting that and then going down the infertility route and having to spend another year and a half in testing treatments, failed treatments. We had a miscarriage. And then ultimately we were so blessed to get pregnant with my son. And at that point, we had been about almost 3 years into attempting to get this singular child to fruition. And I think this definitely has an impact on my feelings about having a single child. Just knowing that's what it took to get us one. I never want to have to repeat that. I really don't. This is where some people, I think, want to call me selfish because it is for my personal reasons that this plays a role in our decision, where mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, I won't do that again. I won't spend 3 years trying to get another baby Earthside. Not to mention, knowing that's what it took the first time, we would have to start doing that pretty much right away after my son was born. I was not in a position physically or mentally or emotionally to do that again. And that's okay. Now, I'm also aware that just because this is what happened the first time, it doesn't mean that it would happen again the second time. And that is true. We did find some things that were potentially not helping the cause of our infertility, but we never really figured out exactly why. I was unexplained infertility. So I don't know for certain if it would follow the same trajectory. There's no way that I would know unless we attempted. But I'm not willing to put myself through that again. Now, let's also talk about going through IVF again, because most likely if we were to have a second, we would go that route or at least start the process of going back to a fertility clinic again, even if it was just to get testing to try to figure out what was happening, if there were still lingering issues that we could address. We would end up having to figure that out again. This also plays into our decision, I think, of having a singleton, is that when we did IVF, we got 2 embryos that were usable, that were genetically normal. The first one we transferred and got pregnant but miscarried, and the second is my son, is Ronan. But we're out of embryos. And I have to wonder sometimes if we had had a couple more that were usable and frozen, the transfer process of getting your body prepared to transfer an embryo is not as intense or invasive as the egg retrieval process. So actually injecting yourself with all the hormones and getting all of the eggs out and getting them fertilized and then having to transfer. It would just be the second part of transferring a frozen embryo. And I have to sometimes wonder if we had more, if I would attempt to use those and say whatever comes from these, but we used what we had, but we don't have anything left and we would need to go through the process again. This is sometimes where people also question my motives or if I'm being selfish, because the frustrating thing about infertility and IVF as well is insurance typically sucks. We did have insurance for our first attempt, but it was a lifetime max. I think it was $30,000, which we blew through pretty quickly. If you are in the infertility world, sadly, you know that $30,000 actually is not a ton. And we still ended up probably paying about $20,000 of our own money once we exhausted insurance to get our son Earthside, right? So we're out of insurance, and to do the entire IVF process again, because like I said, we have no frozen embryos left, it would probably be about $50,000 to $60,000. So financially, I'm not really sure it makes sense to do IVF again, should that be what we need. It's not something I feel strongly enough about to put that money down. Is that selfish? That's up for you to decide. And if you decide that that is selfish of me, like, you can have your thoughts and feelings and opinions, but it's just not something that my husband and I feel is necessary, given the fact that we do feel very at peace with what we have. I've worked a lot of this infertility trauma in therapy, trying to ensure that it wasn't clouding how I feel about our family and the size of our family. And I have come to the conclusion that I am very at peace with what we have. I have found immense gratitude for the fact that our transfer the second time was successful, that I have a healthy son, that I feel like we have completed that part of our family. I feel like the three of us are small but mighty. And of course, infertility trauma may never totally leave me. I know in my heart, and I feel confident in the sense that that's not the sole reason I'm not doing this. It's not the only factor that goes into me saying I'm done having kids. I also want to talk about the fact that logistically, children are a lot. I love my son to the ends of the earth, but raising children is difficult, especially as two working parents. I also feel so at peace that the fact that I just have Ronan gives me the ability to put all of my energy into him. I feel like I am a better mother when I can have that focus on giving him all of the love and enrichment he needs to thrive. And again, that's just something that I feel very at peace on. So it does connect. I'm not going to lie and say it doesn't. I often also have to wonder if we never went through infertility, if we got pregnant, no problem, if I would then be more inclined to do it again. Again, there's no guarantee what happens the first time happens the second. I know plenty of people that have experienced challenges with their second when they didn't with their first. And that's what I have to live in the uncertainty on. I don't live in the uncertainty that I feel very complete with my son. I live with the uncertainty of, well, what if we never had infertility? What if we wouldn't experience a challenge again? But the first thing is, we'll never know what it was like to not struggle, because that already happened. That already exists. And unless we felt very strongly about having a second, we'll probably not know if we would struggle again. And I have to be okay with that. Now, I preface this in the beginning of the episode. We also have the right to change our mind. Humans are humans. Things happen. I may wake up one day, I may wake up tomorrow and all of a sudden have an extreme change of heart. But when it's something as important as bringing a child into this world, I do even feel like if I had this wild change of heart, it would still be a conversation to make sure we did, in fact, want to bring another child into the mix. We'll talk about some questions or criticisms, I guess, of one, it's not only the criticism of when are you having another? Why aren't you having another? Once we get past that kind of, then the peppering of opinions comes in about what my son will be like as a single child. He's going to be selfish. He's not going to be adjusted. He's not going to be able to interact. He's not going to have, sibling dynamics. Here are my thoughts on that. First off, we are very fortunate to live very close to my brother and his wife and their 2 young kids. We see them all the time. They're here so they're 2, 4, and 6, all 3 of them at once. And I do believe you can have cousins that are like siblings. Yes, we don't live together all the time. I understand that. It's not a true sibling. I'm not saying it is. But I have no worries about him having to figure out navigating the world with other people he sees frequently. He also goes to school where he interacts with a lot of children, other kids. He has friends there. There are things that come up he has to work through. And he has us. I think I will be very interested to see what traits maybe he continues to develop. But I think both my husband and I are acutely aware that we do have to be more mindful of certain things if he is going to be the only child. And that's fine. We're okay with that. We as the parents also have to take the ownership and responsibility to make sure that he is getting everything he needs. I also want to say this. I love my siblings and my husband loves his siblings. It's also not a guarantee that your kids will like each other. I think sometimes people say, "But doesn't he want a built-in best friend, or won't he get lonely?" It's not a guarantee that he would like his sibling. You would hope, and I think the majority of the time it works. There's sibling conflict and rivalry across, I think, all siblings, but for the most part, I think it's fine. It's also just not a guarantee that that's going to be his quote unquote built-in best friend. At this point as well, my son is 2 years and 3 months-ish. The gap would be big enough that I don't even know if that would be a huge reality anyway. If they were, 4 or 5 years apart, I don't really know what that would look like. And I say 4 or 5 years apart because, it would take a while. I don't know. I feel like the age gap thing comes into play there too. Like, we're not going to have 2 under 2. We're not going to have kids that are super close in age at this point because we're just not. So I don't think he's going to be lonely. I think there are ways to help him feel more well-adjusted as a single child. I'm not super concerned about that. And I don't think that that's enough of a justification to say, like, we don't feel aligned to this decision, but we're going to do it just to check this box off or to, mitigate criticisms of other people. I also find it's interesting, and this happens, I think, I've talked about this before, it's the milestone stuff. I feel like when you're just starting to date someone, it's like, when are you moving in with them? You move in with them. When are you getting engaged? When are you getting married? When are you having kids? I am constantly peppered with, when's the second? When are you having another? Like, it is a lot of times one of the first questions that people blurt out when they hear my son is around 2. And I'm very upfront and honest, and I say, well, we're not. And that's typically when people ask the questions, or sometimes are judgmental, the whole gamut of things. But what I also find really interesting is I usually say, well, we're not. And if people are curious and ask why, I tell them, I say, we've always kind of felt like we at least wanted one. We had a really hard time having my son. And typically my favorite is when people respond with like, well, my dog walker's hairdresser's second cousin's best friend's sister got pregnant no problem after IVF. And it's good for her. I'm extremely happy that that was her reality, but it's not to say that that might happen to me. And we've talked about this already on this episode of like, I won't go through that again. I will not. I think if I ever did have a change of heart, we would go at it the old-fashioned way and see what happened. But I will not be going through IVF again. It's just not something that I feel is necessary, and I don't want to put my body through that. I also can't imagine having to put my body through that and also potentially experiencing all of the heartbreaking and anxiety and anger and frustration that we felt while also attempting to show up for my son. And I think this might be a controversial opinion. I also have to live my life for me in order to be the best mom that I can be to my son. I want to give him the world, and I want to give him all of the tools and things that he needs to thrive. But in order to do that, I also have to live in a way that I can show up for him to the best of my ability. I don't always get this right. I really don't. But I cannot imagine putting myself through the stress and anxiety and physical discomfort while also being able to provide for him. And I think it's okay to say that. I think there's this conception sometimes that women have to love the pain and ignore it and act like trying to conceive and being pregnant and giving birth is this magical experience. And it is. It blows my mind that this little embryo was first off frozen for 8 months, put back in my body, and then I grew his limbs and eyeballs. And then he was cut out of my body and is now just here. It blows my mind on a daily basis. We are incredible. I also believe that the conversation needs to evolve in its getting there, that it's hard. Being pregnant is hard. I didn't love it. I've talked about this before too. I didn't necessarily enjoy being pregnant. I found it the means to the end. I thought it was very cool. I was kind of fascinated by the process and very grateful for it. And I also wasn't one of those people that loved being pregnant. I think there are people that do love being pregnant. Good for you. I am thrilled that that was your experience. It wasn't mine. Giving birth, I had a C-section, and that recovery is a lot. Postpartum, I also think about that, where it's a lot. I don't think women have to love it. I don't. Not to mention like all of the stuff that I had to do that made me feel like hot trash with IVF. I'm kind of getting on a tangent on that one, but I think the point of that is, I think sometimes we're expected to sacrifice our own selves, our mental health, our livelihood, and brush it under the rug and become almost like a shell of ourselves to give to everyone else. I understand that parenting is an incredibly hard job. It is. I'm a parent. I know that firsthand. But I also know when I don't take care of myself and I am not showing up as the best version of me, I'm not showing up as the best mom for my son. I would also be really interested if anyone has this perspective on not really wanting another, whether that's a second, third, or fourth, whatever the number is, but feeling that immense pressure to do so. I think society also sometimes looks at me as weird, because if you want one, why wouldn't you just go for another? Like, why wouldn't you? You already have one, like you're already doing the parenting thing. Why wouldn't you just go for another? And I challenge that because I think that's more of a societal thing over people having the autonomy to make decisions for their family. I maybe think it's getting a little bit more common to have just one. I think the conversation around how expensive it is to be a human, what children demand, need, people that are experiencing infertility, like I think it's becoming a little bit more common to have one. But I don't really believe I grew up in the generation. I can't think, I know maybe a couple people I can think off the top of my head that are only children that grew up in our generation. I'm 35. I do think it's becoming a little bit more common now. But it becomes very clear to me when like the first question a lot of people ask me is like, when's the second? It's like, why is that the first thing that you question? Maybe think about it. But I think that's why it's important to open these conversations and maybe hear the perspective of someone that is confidently done with having kids. So that's kind of how I feel about that. But I do not feel like we have to lose ourselves in motherhood, whether you want one or you want five. You can have as many or as few kids as you want. But I don't think just because it's more quote unquote normal to have numerous, that everyone has to do it. So that's that. So these were my thoughts. And we'll see in 10 years, who knows? I also try to be a person that does not completely close myself off from conversations or different paths or realities. I try to be someone that stands firm in what feels good in my gut and what I intuitively know is best for me, but also stay open to the reality that life can be unpredictable, life can change, things can happen. So I don't want this to be the ultimate of all ultimates. And for someone, in 10 years to find this episode, and for some reason I have like 6 kids and they're like, what was she talking about? Because life is life. But at this juncture in time, with the journey that we have had, with the conversations that we have had as a family, this is where we're at. I love my son. I love him so incredibly much. I love being a mother. I love that we have created a family. I love it. And I also don't feel deeply pulled to expand that. All right. I hope you have enjoyed these musings. Let me know if you have questions. Always happy to talk. And I really would love to maybe hear someone who has a different perspective. Because I think the more we listen, the more we know. Oh, sorry. One thing. We're not done yet. Going back to the judgment and criticism thing. Oftentimes when I say we had a hard time getting pregnant, people want to know why we don't just adopt and build our family that way. And this is what's bizarre too, is like, I think people see, because of society's expectations, people see a person with one kid and sort of, how do I want to say this? They see them almost as less than because they don't have numerous. And when they hear we had a hard time or, it was really difficult for us, they almost jump into this, okay, we'll fix the problem. Like, well, maybe my in-laws, dog breeders, guinea pigs, owners, whatever, got pregnant, no problem after IVF. Or, my friend had a really good experience with adoption. Like, maybe you should talk to her. It's like, why aren't you understanding that I'm saying we're done and we're cool with that? It's very bizarre. It's a very weird thing. It's almost like people see, oh, you just have one. Let me try to convince you to have more. And if we really did want more, and for some reason, like we were, I was physically unable to carry a child, like I'm sure we'd look into other options. But that's just my advice. If you see someone that has one child, first off, like enough with when's the second coming? Because you also never know what someone's experiencing. And it could be a very painful question to get asked. I think it's okay to be curious. Like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Like I'm so glad that, you have this beautiful, child. Like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on if you feel like you're done or if you're if you think you're going to expand, like just pure curiosity is fine. It's always fine with me. But being like, when's the second coming? And if they say it's not, don't be like, well, let me put you in touch with an adoption agency. Like, I'm good. Okay. That was the final point that I wanted to make. Anyway, happy Friday. I am excited to be back on the air for a solo. We have some very exciting guests coming up in the next couple of weeks. We have somebody already recorded, and then we have some guests that are scheduled to be recorded in the next few weeks or so. So I appreciate you being here. I love you, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye. Thank you for tuning in to the Welcome to My 10 podcast. I hope you had as much fun listening as I do recording. I am so happy to have you here, and see you next episode.